When I opened the lab door that morning, the whole building held its breath. The moment my own sister screamed, "You're a fraud," as the alarms blared, sealing my destiny in cold steel. That sentence still reverberates in my skull like a gunshot, because it wasn't just the shout of a woman protecting her reputation. It was the exact instant the world ripped away the only thing I'd ever been allowed to call home. The walls of my childhood kitchen, painted with crayon constellations and my mother's hopeful, "Someday you'll see the stars," collapsed into the dust of a career I'd sworn to protect. I was a quantum physicist, a dreamer of invisible power, and suddenly I was an embarrassment to every family dinner that followed. The painful departure. I left that house with nothing but a battered notebook, a bruised ego, and a mind that refused to surrender. My professor, once my mentor, called me a fantasy-mongering heretic in front of the entire department. Colleagues turned their backs. Grant panels sent rejection emails that read like epitaphs. "Your theories violate known physics. We cannot fund what cannot exist." My mother whispered, "We're ashamed of you," while my siblings rolled their eyes at my childish ideas of harvesting energy from ambient quantum fluctuations. Instead of crumbling, I packed my lab coat into a cardboard box, walked out of the institute's polished corridors, and drove to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. There, among cracked concrete and flickering fluorescent lights, I built my first prototype, a sleek, glass-capped chamber that resonated with the faint hum of the vacuum itself. It was absurd, it was unheard of, and it was mine. Every sunrise found me hunched over a table of superconducting coils, eyes burning with the same fierce curiosity that once made my younger self stare at the night sky. I wasn't chasing fame. I was chasing a whisper that the universe might be begging for a new kind of clean energy, one that didn't burn the planet but coaxed it to give up its hidden potential. The relentless pursuit. The work was relentless. I spent sleepless nights calibrating quantum sensors that barely registered a photon's sigh. Mocked as a pseudoscientist by former friends, I let their jeers fuel the circuitry of my resolve. I turned every setback into a lesson, every failure into a photon-scale calibration. When a prototype finally lit an entire abandoned farm with a soft blue glow, I knew I was on the cusp of something monumental. The breakthrough came when I discovered a way to coax zero-point energy into a usable current by syncing it with ambient quantum fluctuations. The math was elegant, the experiments bold, and the results clean, renewable power that could power a whole town for pennies. I named it quantum reclamation. The first field test was on a barren plot of desert outside my hometown, a place everyone had once called dead land. Within months, green shoots erupted, water fountains sprang up, and a whole community that had given up hope began to thrive. The arduous ascension and triumph 2 years later. My company, Fluxion Energy Solutions, was a household name whispered in boardrooms and celebrated at climate summits. Our technology had turned swaths of desert into lush, fertile valleys. Turbines hummed where there was only silence. Investors who once scoffed at my fantasy now scrambled to sign contracts. The same professor who called me a fraud now stood in front of a crowd, clapping politely as I accepted an award for sustainable innovation. Each accolade felt like a personal vindication. When the first city powered entirely by our quantum harvesters lit up at night, the skyline resembled a galaxy of constellations, my childhood stars reborn. Yet the most intoxicating victory came when the local news broadcasted footage of a once desolate field, now teeming with crops, children playing, and families thriving under a power grid that sang clean. Through every triumph, I never lost sight of why I started. To prove that the impossible could be made ordinary, that dignity can be reclaimed when you refuse to let humiliation define you. The lessons I learned in those lonely nights, patience, humility, the courage to chase a vision no one believes in, became the compass that guided me through both triumphs and setbacks. The cathartic return and poetic justice. Then came the day I turned my gaze back toward the cracked porch of my childhood home. My family, my sister, my mother, my brothers, were gathered around a modest dinner table as if nothing had changed. They remembered the day I was called a freak and a burden, the day I left with nothing more than a bruised ego and a notebook. I walked in, heart pounding, not to boast, but to show. The house was silent until I lifted the thin, transparent sheet covering a small device perched on the kitchen counter. It was a miniature quantum harvester, no larger than a coffee mug, that emitted a soft, steady pulse of pure energy. When it engaged, the kitchen lights flickered, then glowed a warm amber. The refrigerator hummed with newfound efficiency, the oven heated without a gas flame, the ceiling fan spun, stirring air that had been stale for years. "Look," I said, voice steady, "this is what you called fantasy. This is what you called an embarrassment." My mother's hand trembled, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and shame. My sister stared at the device, her mouth open, the same skeptical grin that once aimed at my dreams now froze in mid-curve. The room filled with the soft whir of the harvester, a sound that seemed to echo the beating of every heart that had ever doubted me. In that moment, the consequences of their past derision manifested not as vengeance, but as an undeniable truth. They saw the tangible proof of a vision they once scoffed at. Their faces changed, no longer the smug superiority of "I told you so," but the raw, humbling realization that they had underestimated a force they could not control. I didn't say a word about retribution. I simply let the device work. The lights dimmed, the hum settled into a comforting rhythm, and the house itself seemed to exhale. My mother's eyes pooled with tears, not of sorrow, but of relief and gratitude. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "We were wrong." The words landed like a gentle snowfall covering years of frost. My sister reached out, clasped my hand, and finally let the floodgate of apology open. "We were scared," she said. "We thought we were protecting you, but we were protecting our own pride." The night stretched into dawn, and as the sun rose over the once barren fields I had revived, I realized that the most profound justice was not in making them pay, it was in allowing them to see, to witness the impossible they once dismissed, now humming quietly in their kitchen, was enough. It was a poetic justice that felt like a warm hand on a long, cold shoulder. Number, the insightful close reflecting on this journey. I understand that every ridicule, every dismissal, every moment of humiliation was a catalyst that forced me to excavate deeper, to refine my purpose, to build something that could not be ignored. The lesson I now carry is simple yet profound. When the world tells you you're an embarrassment, let that very embarrassment become the fuel that powers your destiny. I returned home not to claim a trophy, but to plant a seed of humility and forgiveness. The glowing harvester on the kitchen counter was more than a device. It was a bridge, connecting the child who once stared at constellations on the kitchen wall to the adult who now creates constellations of clean energy. So, if you ever hear that inner voice whispering, "You're a fraud, you'll fail," remember my story. Let the mockery sharpen your resolve. Let the doubt sharpen your mind, and let the eventual triumph light up the darkest corners of anyone's skepticism. Because the universe has a quiet way of rewarding perseverance, sometimes with a whisper, sometimes with a roar, but always with a chance for redemption that feels as bright as a sunrise over a field you thought would never bloom again. And that, my friends, is the true power of turning a dismissed dream into a living, breathing, glowing reality. End.